Hello, and welcome to Her Path, the podcast for busy women looking for purpose, health, and happiness. So today we are discussing inclusion and belonging. Inclusion and belonging, they're closely related concepts. They mean two completely different things, though. Inclusion is more about creating a space where everyone feels welcome and valued, regardless of the differences, where everyone has equal opportunities to participate and contribute. Belonging is more of an emotional experience. It's a feeling that we get, a feeling of being connected, a feeling of being accepted, a feeling of being appreciated, of being part of the group or part of a community. Inclusion is like being invited to the party, while belonging is like feeling cool at the party, participating in the conversations at the party, feeling like your presence at the party is valued, feeling like your presence at the party means something positive, like people are happy to see you. They're glad that you came. They're happy that you showed up. And in turn, you're glad that you came and you're glad that you showed up. Why is this even important? Why does it matter? So, as busy women who are trying to juggle everything, we struggle a lot with the feeling of not belonging. Career-wise, we sometimes feel isolated from others, especially for powerful women working in male-dominated areas, or women who are in high-powered careers or in corporate scenarios where there are so many levels of management where it feels like your voice doesn't matter. In relationships, sometimes we may feel like we don't belong, we don't have a group, we don't have a network that we can relate to, we don't have a network we can lean on, we lack support from women who we can relate to, or feeling like we can't be ourselves for fear of criticism or fear of judgment. So, what does belonging actually feel like? Belonging does feel like you're being heard, like you're being valued, like you're being supported, feeling encouraged, feeling like you do have a social support network. And when you do feel like you belong, you're more likely to engage, you're more likely to feel motivated, you're more likely to be productive. When you feel like you belong, you are less likely to feel stressed, you're less likely to feel burned out. You're less likely to feel dissatisfied, which is super common with a lot of busy women. When we feel like we belong, we're more likely to feel equipped to handle all the demands of the career, the family. When we have colleagues and mentors that we trust, we're better equipped to navigate challenges that can keep us from our goals. So, how can we create for ourselves a sense of inclusion, which will in turn help us feel like we belong? Or how can we get that sense of belonging for ourselves? And I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with. So that's what I wanted to chat with you all about today, to get some ideas of how we can create that sense of belonging and inclusion so that we feel more satisfied with all of the things, have less stress, have less burnout. So I would like to open it up for discussion here. Nancy, what are some ways that you feel belonging, and how do you get a sense of inclusion for yourself?
So belonging, right, is a feeling. And I think for me, I've had to create that within myself. Being by myself now has been a really good space for me, just to do a lot of meditation, reflective journaling. And yeah, just being with me and understanding myself more has been huge for me, knowing what I want out of life, and not being afraid to say what I feel, for sure, because I didn't feel included for a major part of my life growing up in school and whatnot, because my parents divorced early, so I was like the odd person out. So I think so much of my life I felt like I didn't belong. I knew it was up to me to create that within myself, that sense of belonging. And I think for me, it's been really interesting to just love who I am.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's
and I think
my,
and so when we have a sense of insecurity, that can really put a big barrier in our ability to feel like we belong in whatever space it may be, whether it's in our relationship or, you know, in our professional lives. How about you, Beth?
Well, that's interesting because I had not thought of this as an adult, and I I for the longest time until recently, I felt okay not belonging to anything other than my family and small, a couple of friends. And my upbringing, I felt like I did belong and that I was included in everything. But at that time, I also felt like nobody really understood me, and I desired to be alone. Very much an introvert, still am an introvert. And having relationships outside of just your friends that you have common interests in has helped create a sense of belonging for me. And work, you, in my field of work, it's very specialized, and I have a sense of belonging within that. And so, yeah, that's a really tough question of like examples. And I guess, maybe I would offer to um, our listeners, if they feel, that they are looking for something or some group to belong to be open and curious and try different things, going on sites like meetup.com and maybe trying something outside their comfort zone, or joining a book club, or attending just various groups that are out there that you could just explore and see where you could maybe belong and fit in, or create your own inclusion and invite people and have people feel welcomed if you are gifted with being a host. But that's a really tough question. So I'm very curious what Elisa's going to say, because she's very good at helping people feel a part of community. That is your specialty, that comes naturally to you.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, so I've always felt like I belonged in, multiple different circles. I remember that there was, one job that I had, um, and I never felt like I belonged with my peers, yeah, and my leader. And it was so foreign to me, because I had always been included and belonged, or felt like I belonged. And it was really disarming for me. It was really paralyzing for me. I did not understand it. It was so foreign. It was so uncomfortable that I really lost my footing on who I was. And I was afraid to show up authentically. I was sometimes afraid to speak my mind. I was sometimes afraid to stand up to points of views that I disagreed with. And you all know me, that's not who I am, right? I am pretty authentic to my core. But so I appreciate how difficult it can be when you don't feel like you belong and you don't feel like you're included by choice. Um, That being said, I am very interested in this topic, from a diversity and equity perspective, right? Inclusion and belonging are key to the diversity and equity work happening, around the world. I also am very interested in it from our, our US Surgeon General, who released a whole paper on this new loneliness epidemic that we are in. And mostly women are feeling very isolated and lonely and without those connections. And part of it is from the pandemic, but part of it is societal. But I'm very interested in that. And that's, one of the reasons why I have launched coaching circles. So for me, coaching circles are my answer to help women build new communities and be in a place where they belong and they can be their authentic selves. So these are, 8-week sessions with no more than four women, right? I like it very small and very intimate. And what I've seen with those circles, I don't know, I think I'm on my 10th circle now, is bonds are formed immediately. And they're so deep. I've had circles that at the end of the 8 weeks, they want to do a retreat and we go off and do a retreat together. I've had circles who say, we can't stop, we have to keep going. So, they're doing another circle, a different circle with the same women. I've had circles who they get together like, once a month for dinner, and lifelong friends, lifelong confidants, and people who they can share their most vulnerable spaces with. And that has been one of the most rewarding aspects of my work, is to help people find a place where they belong and find that place where they're included and they're supported and they're cherished. Because there is an epidemic going on. So many women that I talk to, I've lost my community. I've lost my work friends because I work from home now. I've lost that, the water cooler conversation or going around the corner for a drink after work or any of those things. The dynamics have changed so much in business and industry. And I think that also can translate to our personal lives, how do we connect with people not at work, right? How do we connect with people in our community? And I like Beth's point that we have to be purposeful about that. And we have to dig deep and find courage, right? For those of us who are more introverted, and who would, much rather be on the couch with our cats. That's a hard thing to do, to say, hey, why don't you go to a book club where you don't know anyone? Or why don't you go check out this church and you don't know anyone, right? That's asking a lot, but that kind of courage is what we need to help build back that sense of belonging.
Right. And I think we can make the choice to decide if it's worth it to feel like we belong
Yes.
in that situation. So I'll give the example of me at a job. It's a corporate job. I don't own it. I don't own anything there. I don't own the building. I don't have a financial stake in it. I show up to work and I leave. But I decide to show up. I belong here. This is my gig. This is my job. This is my profession. And I actually had to make an intentional decision to think that, like, I belong here and this is mine. This job is mine. And so in doing so, I slowly built that sense of belonging, which then fueled the pride in the job itself. So it fueled my pride in simple things like owning my space, because I actually, I will say, I still haven't put like the degrees and all and decorated the walls in an office I've been in for almost 10 years, because there was that feeling of, I don't belong here. And what if one day it's taken away from me? Someone walks me out the door or I get fired. I'll have to pull off all these degrees and take all the decoration out. And so literally didn't put anything up on the walls or anything. But feeling like I belong here allowed me to take ownership and then really fuel the decisions I made on the day-to-day, even with simple things like, keeping, the clinic rooms clean. It's my room. It's my office. I need to take pride in that space. So maybe the cleaning person didn't dust off the, equipment right. So this is mine. I'm going to clean it off, because it is mine, instead of stressing out and freaking out and complaining about someone else didn't do this correctly. I take ownership because I belong here and this is mine. or in a patient's care, expecting someone else to do something for them. Maybe it didn't happen. They didn't follow through with it. So I will take ownership because I belong here. This is my role and this is what I do. Simple things like that. I mean, making the decision to take ownership, I think really fuels that sense of belonging, which gives you just so much satisfaction and even a sense of control in what you're doing. And that totally helps with burnout, just feeling like you have ownership. And the same thing in your house, like so much drama in my brain about, the dirty dishes in the sink. This is my house. This house belongs to me. Those dirty dishes belong to me. Even though I didn't dirty them. Who else do I expect to, help me in this situation? It's mine. I belong here and I'm going to, take care of this right now. It's only going to take me 2 seconds. Deciding and choosing, to take ownership of something, and this belongs to me, or I belong with this. And also sometimes make the decision, you know what? I don't belong here. This is not for me. These people are not for me. And making the decision to cut that off or not participate or, not spend any more time in that is also okay.
I think another important part of this, and you kind of gleaned a little bit about it, Gabby, is the idea of psychological safety, right? When you belong, you have psychological safety because you know that you have respect and people have your back, and you have a sense of safety where you can be your authentic self, you can take risks, you can go out on a limb, right? Whereas if you don't feel like you belong, like just like you said, I'm not going to hang up all my degrees because I don't belong here, right? You weren't willing to take that chance, right? That was psychological safety to me. And I think inclusion, so I think of the boardroom, you can be included in a boardroom conversation.
Right.
But unless you belong to that group, or you feel like you belong in that room, you're not gonna speak truthfully or take that risk, right? So
how do you create that for yourself, right?
yeah.
So how do you create that for yourself? And I've done it, and I'm sure you've all done it or been in situations where you've seen other people do it, where you get invited to the party, right? You get invited, and there's all these little groups, and you're outside of the group.
Mhm.
You have a choice to make. You can keep yourself separated, stand in the corner, keep yourself busy with your little snacks and your drink and keep your mouth occupied so that you can avoid all those groups. Or also go out on the limb, step up and present yourself. And you never know what's going to happen. It may be an amazing conversation and make new friends, make new connections, learn something new about someone else, or those are not your people. You may just turn around and walk away.
Right.
You may ask a question in a board meeting and someone may shut you down, right? Someone may not answer your question, or they may say, this is not the place to discuss that. We will talk one-on-one later on.
Right.
But it's that fear, right? The fear of rejection, that fear of judgment, they're not going to like me. What if I say something stupid?
Mhm.
That can also lead us to isolate ourselves or, disinvite ourselves, or we just make the decision to not show up sometimes.
Right. I'm curious, Nancy and Beth, because you both, have clinical, we all have clinical backgrounds, but when I think about your backgrounds working in the ICU, working in the hospice environment, how that shows up differently than it does in leadership and a voice at the table and at the boardroom, right? How does it show up in your clinical spaces?
So right now for me, I'm just doing one-on-one with my clients. Whereas before, when I worked in the hospital, I worked as a staff nurse and I got promoted to management. It's interesting that when I was a staff nurse, I felt like I belonged to the group, but then being in like a managerial position, I didn't feel like I belonged to that group, that friend group as much. So that was interesting. But now it's very one-on-one with clients. So for me, I do a lot to make them feel like they belong, that they feel included, that they have a voice, I create a space where they can tell me anything. And I think that really helps.
I
Yeah.
love that, Nancy. That's great. I actually, as you're talking, it made me realize that that is part of entrepreneurship that I struggle with, is not having a sense of belonging, not having coworkers, not having a boss, And so for me in my work, every company that I've ever worked for in the hospice world is very intentional of making everybody feel included and part of the community and belonging to, like, we all work together for a greater good for that person, right? And doing and bringing in people with the meetings, and like nobody is more important than the other person. Most of the physicians that I've worked for, they don't require you to call them doctor, where that's not usually going to happen in the hospital setting. You call your physician doctor. I think times are changing a little bit, but back in the day, that was just a very big no-no to call a doctor by their first name. And that's all I've ever known in the hospice world, is by calling them by their first name. And just the participation and the group discussion, and everybody has something to bring to the table, whether you're a certified nurse's aide or you're a social worker or chaplain or physician or volunteer or bereavement coordinator. Everybody has a voice and it's all valued. And so I just feel really, really fortunate to have always had a sense of belonging. And I think that's maybe why in my personal life, I didn't feel like I was missing anything, because I got that sense of inclusion and belonging from my career ever since I've been in my teenage years. I mean, I started in healthcare as a teenager. And so there's just something about, being a healthcare worker, like that's kind of my people. Yeah. But thanks, Nancy, for shedding some light on me to understand why entrepreneurship is challenging in a lot of ways. And I'm realizing that that is one of them. Mhm.
And, for women who feel that they are lacking a feeling of belonging to, in their work, or, in their relationships, or just in general, some ways to combat that are to invite yourself to the party, invite yourself, include yourself, wear the amazing, and this is an analogy, or a metaphor, but, be very literal if you like, wear the amazing outfit, wear those high, uncomfortable heels, put on your makeup, show up to the party, start building those relationships, start with the networking, join those professional organizations, say yes next time you get an invitation instead of automatically shutting it down, volunteer, seek mentorship, or be a mentor. You get amazing, amazing sense of, ownership and satisfaction in some ways from also offering mentorship to others, because we're all on the same boat. Join those professional organizations, volunteer. We can include ourselves, and it's not always going to be comfortable. And you may not be everyone's cup of tea, and it's okay. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. You're perfect just the way you are. But if you never show up to the party, you're not going to be able to dance. So it was great talking to you all. Have a good night.
Hey, one more thing before we leave. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. We are certified professional coaches, but this broadcast is not a substitute for medical or psychological advice. Okay, thanks for listening. See you next week.